probably is a little bit because it's summer. Maybe it's because of this awesome pin I just bought from Hopesick Co. Maybe it's because I've been spending a lot of days playing the Goosebumps Horror Town game, which if anybody else is playing it, oh my god, visit my town so we get more pumpkins. It's awesome. But Are You Afraid of the Dark was the perfect gateway, and we were so lucky because we didn't just have Are You Afraid of the Dark. We had Are You Afraid of the Dark, we had Goosebumps, we had Eerie, Indiana, we had things like Real Scary Stories, and then we had like the more adult ones, like, you know, like your Tales from the Dark Side and your Tales from the Crypt. And so it was just such a great time for horror TV, and Are You Afraid of the Dark was like the perfect, it was spooky but not too spooky where the kids would have nightmares forever. So it's a show that I love to rewatch even as an adult, sometimes laughing at how, you know, like some of the cheese of it, but it was perfectly charming. And there were some great, really some great characters on this show. So, all right, so we're going to count down from 10 to 1. But before we do that, I'm going to share an embarrassing story about myself. So when I was young and, you know, playing with my friends, I decided I wanted a midnight society of my very own. And I lived in a city, and I had like a wooden deck, so fires were out of the question. We could not have a campfire, and none of our parents were taking us camping. So I decided, well, we can get everybody together in my backyard, and we'll use a flashlight as the campfire, and we, you know, I still don't know what the magic powder was that they used to make the fire crackle the way that they did, but it wouldn't have worked anyway because we were throwing it on a flashlight. But I had the great idea of let's throw baby powder. So of course my parents were like super pissed the next day because my yard was like covered in baby powder. I think I probably used an entire container, but whatever. I was young. So yeah, so I loved Are You Afraid of the Dark, you know, as it started out, and so, all right, let's count them down. So number 10, The Tale of the Super Specs. I picked this episode not only because it's really fun, but also because it's a Sardo episode, no Mr. accent on the dough. He's such a great recurring character on Are You Afraid of the Dark. He's super fun, he's super goofy, he's a con artist, he never knows what kind of trouble he's going to get you in. And before we go any further, I mean, there's probably a rule that if something is like 20 years old, it's okay to talk about the episodes, but spoilers are in this. So if you've actually never watched Are You Afraid of the Dark before, there are spoilers in this. Okay, so it's about a kid named Weeds, which Are You Afraid of the Dark was so good at terrible names for kids. There was a lot of it, and some of their monsters too, but okay, alrighty. So Weeds is at a magic shop, and he's at Sawdo's magic shop, and he's supposed to be going on a date with his girlfriend, but instead he decides he's going to stay there and goof off, and he throws magic powder, which I would imagine is probably the same magic powder as the fire powder, and he enchants by accident these like X-ray specs, which were like, they looked like my glasses with foil, like tin foil, and they were round, and like the middle of them reminded me of like when you got Jiffy Pop, like the top of it had like the swirl, and so he enchants these glasses, and now his girlfriend, every time she puts them on, she sees these black robed figures, and they're like pointing at her, and you know, so she's terrified, and he doesn't believe her because when he puts them on, he doesn't see it, which I still don't understand, because if the glasses were enchanted, I think he should see them. Anyway, so as the episode goes on, she's seeing them more and more. Now she's seeing them in her house, which as a kid, I remember her seeing them in the house, I thought was super spooky, because imagine like your parents leave you for like an hour, you know, like, oh, I have to run to the supermarket, and you're just old enough that you can kind of stay home alone, and you're sitting there, and, you know, I think every kid when you were home alone, aside from just being like, yay, my parents aren't here, you know, I'm gonna watch trash and eat rubbish, you better come out and stop me. But, you know, if you heard a noise or something that was unfamiliar, you definitely felt a little spooked. And imagine, like, seeing something that you knew wouldn't have been there logically, you know, and so she's seeing these over and over, and now she runs back to her, you know, her boyfriend, and she's like, I keep seeing these creatures, and he's like, I don't know what you're talking about. He puts them on again, he doesn't see them. Eventually, they go to Sardo for help, and the episode, you know, turns into them having a seance to try to communicate with these spirits, like, why are you bothering us? And what I vividly remember about this episode are the two giant eyes that appear. So they're having a seance in like a totally black room. You know, there's no lights or furniture or anything, you know, like when they're doing this. So all of a sudden there's these giant eyes like looking down at them, and he's like, you know, and they, you know, they say some magic words, and Sardo thinks he saved the day. And I have to point out one of my favorite Sardo. I don't know if he says this in more than one episode, but every time when the kid walked into like the magic shop, he says something like, "Bye now," or "Bye now." I always thought that was really funny. Anyway, all right. So now they say the spell, and they think that it worked. They look around, and they're back in the girlfriend's house, and everything is happy, and, you know, whatever, until all of a sudden they see the, you know, the black-robed creature walking through, and it turns out that they've now sucked themselves in. It was a parallel universe, and the parallel universe won. And they said something like, oh, we were trying to get rid of you too. And it pans over, and you see the boyfriend, the girlfriend, and Sardo trapped in Sardo's crystal ball, and they're banging on the crystal ball like, let me out of here. And I remember as a kid, like, being like, whoa, what a twist. So yeah, that is number 10. All right, number 9. The Tale of the Dollmaker. Alright, so the Dollmaker episode, I still think about this episode, even as an adult, when I see miniatures. There's a girl staying at her aunt and uncle's, and it's a place that reminds me, I don't know why, but it reminds me of Long Island. I don't know. So she's visiting, and she immediately wants to go play with her friend Susan, who lives next door. And her aunt and uncle kind of like dance around. Oh, Susan moved away, which you know is baloney. You can tell that there's something else going on there, but like you know, you don't know exactly what. And eventually, the girl makes her way over to what was Susan's house, and she finds a dollhouse in the attic. And she's looking at it, and she's like, wow, this is super cool. And when she's looking inside, she sees a door close. And she's like, she rationalizes, you know, she was like one of those together kids. She wasn't like super scared of everything. And so she was like, it must have been a mouse or something. But then she looks, and after a very dramatic coughing event, she like trips over some furniture or something. She looks and sees this door, and the door is kind of like enticing to her, and she like wants to go through this door. And she goes to open it, and her uncle comes out of nowhere and grabs her, and he's like, what are you doing? And so the door leads to like outside, but they're up in the attic. So it's like the Winchester Mystery House kind of. So I'm wondering if that was probably a nod to that. So, you know, he's like, I don't want you ever coming here again, and, you know, all this. And so she's like, all right, you know, like she, you know, tries to drop it, but now her curiosity has gotten the best of her, so she goes back. And so when she goes back, she sees the door again, and she opens the door up, and when she opens the door, it's not outside, it's inside the dollhouse. And inside the dollhouse, it's an exact replica of Susan's house, so it's really, you know, it's cool. It's like kind of walking into another universe. And so she walks in, and she sees all of a sudden Susan, her friend, in like a doll's kind of like nightgown, and they picked the perfect girl to be Susan because she looked like a doll. She had like that perfect like doll-like hair and those big like rosy cheeks. And she's like, oh my god, come on, I'm gonna get you out of here. Like, I can't believe I found you. And she's like, I can't go. And she's like, what do you mean? And she goes like this and just takes her entire arm off, and it's like a porcelain arm. And I remember that scene growing up. I was like, oh my goodness, like, that can't happen. So now she knows, like, okay, this dollhouse is like eating my friend. It's turning her into a doll. And then she starts to realize it's doing it to her too. She looks at herself, and she's got like white splotches of, you know, porcelain-esque like skin. And so she's trying to figure the way out. And her friend Susan just keeps saying, it's the attic. And eventually she makes her way to the dollhouse attic, that has the same and like, you know, alluring door as the real attic. But this time when she opens it up, it looks like outside. And so she's like, this doesn't make any sense. She's like, this should lead to the attic. Like, why doesn't this lead to the attic? But she figures that there's something mystical and magical going on. And so she, you know, gathers her friend Susan, because her friend Susan can't really move. She's like a doll now. And they just jump out. They jump out the door into, you know, down a few stories into the grass, and so they cut it there. And then all of a sudden, it's like super happy and yay, they saved the day. And Susan is a real girl again, and they live happily ever friend after. So, great episode. All right, number 8, Tale of the Lonely Ghost. This episode, I feel like they recycle some formulas, but they work. You know, each one, they would add like a little more flair. And so this is another girl going to stay with her aunt and her cousin. And they are, the cousin, I remember, is a total brat. Her name is Beth, and she doesn't like her. And, you know, she's just a total snot. And she's dressed totally 90s, like full scrunchy and like long shorts. And there's lots of neon happening in this episode. And so the girl really just wants to, you know, she just wants to belong. And so in, you know, staying with her, she also is introduced to this character named Nanny, and she's like, that's just my nanny, and, you know, we don't like her, and I can't wait for her to move, and, you know, just total brattiness. And the poor girl staying there, she's just like, I just want to have a nice summer, you know. And so Beth and her friends are like, okay, you can hang out with us this summer if you go into the spooky house next door and you flash a light out the window so we know you were there. And so, you know, this girl's really wanting to belong, so she's like, all right, I'm gonna do this. Sounds fun. Great. She goes up, and it's spooky and scary, but she's okay until she sees a mirror, and in the mirror she sees a ghost. And it's a little girl, and she's wearing like a big, like a white nightgown. And she's kind of like, and I remember first, before I saw this, like actually saw this episode, I remember seeing it on, when they came out with like, I don't remember if they were like the best of Snick, like kind of tapes, but this was the episode that they had of Are You Afraid of the Dark on the tape, and so they had her on the back, and I remember like looking at it as a kid being like, oh, I'm scared to like watch this. Obviously I did it anyway. And so now the girl goes running out of the house, like who can blame her? Even as an adult, if I saw a ghost in the mirror, I would definitely run. And she goes back, and the girls are like making fun of her. And the next day, the aunt goes over to the house, and she's like, what did you guys do? And they're like, what are you talking about? She's like, you guys drew all over the walls, like you're gonna help clean it up today. And so they're like, what are you talking about? So they go over, and help me is written backwards all over every like wall in this room. And I remember that like feeling like, ooh, I felt so, you know, scary as a kid. And so now the two girls are, you know, bickering and, you know, whatever, and cleaning off these, you know, help me's. And then they find that they look over, and all of a sudden they see the ghost, and she just comes out of the mirror, and she's in the room, like, with them. And the bratty girl, Beth, gets, like, trapped in the mirror, and she's like, you have to help me! So she's trying to figure it out, and the ghost is trying to give her clues. And you come to find out that the girl, her mom, was actually Nanny. And so the girl very cleverly matches up, I forget if it was like a piece of jewelry, the girl cleverly matches them up based on some clues, and goes over, and Nanny's about to move away. And so she stops her, and she's like, you have to come into this house. And she's like, no, I don't want to go there. It's too many sad memories. And she's like, no, you have to come. And she goes, and so this little ghost was Nanny's daughter. And so she reunites them, and now Nanny walks into the mirror with her, and you see like this other world, you know, on the other side. And, you know, and they're reunited, which I would imagine means that Nanny is now dead. Which kind of morbid for kids, but then they're left with, you know, what happened to Beth, and she's now in the closet behind the mirror, so that's kind of funny. And so her friends make fun of her a little bit, and the girl's socially accepted and everybody lives happily ever after. Or happily, I guess they don't live happily ever after because the nanny's dead. So they live hauntingly ever after. Number 7, The Tale of the Bookish Babysitter. I love this episode. I love the concept behind this episode. I love the little monster, like the, well, not Little Monsters, not the Fred Savage movie. I love the monsters in this episode. All right, so we have a boy. His mom is going to call babysitter, and, you know, he's like, I'm too old for a babysitter. And she's like, no, you're not. I'm calling a babysitter. This girl comes highly recommended, and you're going to be nice to her. And so in comes Belinda with her, like, glued hair. I don't know what. She had, like, a bob cut. And, like, it was, like, very, like, how Lydia Dietz had, like, her bangs that they looked like they were gelled, you know, but, like, to her whole head. She was blonde, but still, like, gothy. She was super cool. And so she's like, I'm going to get him to read books. And the mom's like, yeah, okay, whatever. So she starts to try to make a deal with the kid Ricky, and he's like kind of a brat, which a lot of bratty kids in Are You Afraid of the Dark, and they always had the happy message of, like, they kind of taught, you know, the bratty kids how to not be such a brat by the time the episode was over, so, you know, kept the family values thing going on. So this kid does not want to be bothered. He's like, I just want to sit here and watch TV, and she's like, listen, I'm going to make you a deal. If you read a book with me for 5 minutes, when it's done, I'll let you do whatever you want. And so he's like, really, 5 minutes, and then I can do what I want. She's like, yep, that's the deal. So he's like, okay. And so she makes him pick a book, and then she says that she wants him to read it aloud. And so Ricky starts reading these stories aloud, and he's like, oh, whatever, this is boring. I don't want to do this. And she's like, no, no, no. Once you start a story, you shouldn't stop it. And so he decides to read a part of another book without finishing the other book. And Belinda really had these powers that these books made a story come to life for the kids, where if the story was about a witch would really appear, and if the story was about a ghost would really appear. So he gets the stories mixed up. And I remember this great scene, and it's really goofy now, like looking back at it as an adult, but I remember as a kid there was 2 great, you know, scares in this episode. So one of them was that he goes to his room and he's like, whatever, I'm over this. I'm just going to sit here and play my Game Boy or whatever he was playing. And he looks, and all of a sudden, coming down the hall, there's this ghostly old man. And he reminds me so much now, like, I recently rewatched the episode, and he reminds me so much of in House of Thousand Corpses when the final girl is in you know, the lair of Dr. Satan, and she's going through that, like, you know, horror maze of everything. She comes across a man in a bunny suit that looks like he's been down there for 15 years, and that he looks like that. Like, he has that, like, withdrawn face, so he, you know, he's, like, in this black robe and cloak, and he's, like, just floating down the hall, which was super spooky, and, so now he runs in and, like, he's like, Belinda, what do I do? And she's like, I know, we have to burn the pages of the book. Like, this is how it's going to work. But meanwhile, you hear on the other side of the door, like, hey, Ricky, let me in, let me in. But he thinks that he's in the room with Belinda, and he thinks that the other thing is a trick, so he's like, no. And she's like, yeah, Ricky, let me in, or whatever she says. And she turns around, and she's got this horribly scary face. But now watching it as an adult afterwards, she's like, blah! Which is super ridiculous, but still, as, you know, as a little kid, it was awesome. And so now he's mixed up these stories. And so he gets to the real Belinda, and she's like, okay, we have to finish the story. That's the only way that this is going to stop. So he, you know, he leads them into the basement, and, you know, he starts reading the story. And then he looks up. She's like, are you sure you're ready for this? And he's like, yeah. He's like, what? It's just a book. Like, you know, and she's like, no, are you sure? And he's like, yep. So she gives him the book, and he starts reading it, and then he looks up, and he's in, like, an old, like, castle, and so the story, like, sucked him in. And Are You Afraid of the Dark really did that a lot. Like, you know, they just, they took a concept, and they were like, you know what happens if we actually put you in the situation instead of just telling you about it? So, really awesome. So now he's in this castle dungeon, and he's got to face the ghost and the witch. I remember in that one scene, he's like talking. He sees a little girl, and she's like, "Could you help me?" And he's like, she felt like she was from another time or another story, and then she turns into the witch, again in that same like scary witch who looked like Belinda. She had the hair like and stuff like her, and I'm not sure if they just put prosthetics on the actress or if they they used someone else, but and so he ends up saving himself because I think the image on his shirt is a sword, and so like that's the symbol that puts the ghost to rest, and all this stuff, and so, he ends up getting the sword based on something, and he slashes at the witch, and she just goops out like all this stuff. They didn't use real blood, they used, it looked like slime from Double Dare, and so he faces the witch and he faces the ghost, and then before he knows, he's back in his living room reading a book aloud to Belinda, and his mom comes home to see him reading, and she's kind of like, "Hey, what happened here?" And he asks Belinda, like, "Did this really happen?" And she's like, "Yeah, it's just your imagination, Ricky." Number 6, The Tale of Apartment 214. This episode is about a girl who just moves into an apartment building. She doesn't have any friends, and she makes friends with an old woman who lives in the building. Her name is Madeline Kegel. Not Kegels. Kegel. And she's an artist, and she lives alone. And so she goes over every day to hang out with this old lady, and she brings her groceries, and it's really sweet, And she meets another girl in the building who's her age, and she, they exchange a couple times, like, "Oh yeah, hey, we should hang out sometime." And so one day the girl's over at Madeline's house, and Madeline says, "Would you mind, coming over tomorrow? It's really important to me. I don't like to be alone." And so she's like, "Yeah, sure, no problem." But as she's getting ready to go over that day, she runs into the other girl from the building who's like, "I have tickets to the Battle of the Bands." And so, she's like, "Oh, I can't. I made someone a promise that I would come over." And she's like, "But it's Battle of the Bands." And one of the most ridiculous lines in this episode that I quote sometimes because I think it was just so goofy. She's like, "I didn't even know they were already selling tickets, but the event is that day." So it's really stupid, but like, all right. So she decides, like, I'm gonna, not hang out with Madeline today, and I'm gonna go to the Battle of Bands. And now you see Madeline at the window, and it's really sad. This poor old lady, she's just sitting there by herself. She doesn't want to be alone. And so she comes home later in the day, and she hears Madeline crying through the door. So she goes to go over, to like give her an apology. But when she opens the door, the apartment is empty. Turns out that this apartment is like empty, and she's like, "How could that be? I've been over there a bunch of times before." So she calls the landlord, and the landlord's like, "I haven't rented this place out in so long because every time I try to rent it out, somebody moves out or they get scared and they don't want to rent it." So she kind of forgets about it. Like, after, she wonders what happened to Madeline, but she doesn't, she kind of goes on with her life. And one day her mom is going out, and she is home alone, and it's a thunderstorm to set the atmosphere nice and spooky, and she hears a knock at the door, and she looks through the peephole, and she sees Madeline's face, and so she's like, "Oh my god, Madeline, like, what happened to you? I missed you," and whatever. But she opens the door, and there's nobody there. And so she walks back down, and I don't remember why she walks back to the apartment. I want to say her dog, runs over or something, but she goes into the apartment, and she sees for the first time Madeline's ghost. Like, and she's like, "I just didn't want to be alone because it was the day I died." And so, like, as a kid, it was like, whoa, she was hanging out with a ghost the whole time. How scary is that? And so the girl, like, runs back to her apartment, and then she starts getting notes slipped under the door that says, "Why did you break your promise?" And my cousin and I, growing up, we used to slip notes under, we lived in, like, a joint house, like, and we used to slip notes under the door, like, saying that. And so, she eventually tells her, like, "Madeline, like, I didn't mean to break my promise. I just, because I made a new friend doesn't mean I don't care about you," and, all this stuff. And so, wholesome message, and decides that what if we move into your apartment so then you're never alone anymore? And so the mom can't see Madeline and the guy can't see her. Only the young girl can see her. And so now they move into the apartment with the ghost, and that's how they end the story. And I think it's really ridiculous because, like the landlord says something like, oh yeah, you get a discount for living with ghosts. And the mom's like, what? But the funny part is, like, during the regular part of the story, like, the girl's bringing Madeline home, like, groceries and stuff. So I'm like, who's she bringing? She's bringing home, like, these flowers, and her mom's gonna just think they're for her, I guess. I don't know. But, number 5, The Tale of the Ghastly Grinner. This episode is so goofy fun, but the Ghastly Grinner is scary as heck. And, I think if they didn't make the episode as, like, lighthearted as it was with Hooper Piccolaro, that it would have probably been really, really scary for a kid, because his character was so, like, he was like the Joker, but he just, like, he looked so, like, spooky and ominous. And so, alright, so it's about a guy, a kid, his name is Ethan, and he wants to draw comics, and so he keeps drawing and submitting, and he keeps getting rejections. But then he gets a message to go to this comic shop where he meets this woman who I remember she calls him Cakes, that he has the gift, and so she wants him to finish this comic about the Ghastly Grinner. And it was created by her father, Sylvester Uncas. And so I remember this one was really prominent with the names. I thought it was really funny. So the kid starts drawing it, and or he's reading the Ghastly Grinner. It's like a only edition comic, and he gets it. He accidentally gets it wet, so he puts it in the microwave to dry. But he gets a phone call from Hooper Piccolaro. She sits next to him in English class, and he forgets about it, and instead of it just going on fire, no, it, like, kind of explodes. And so now all of a sudden the Ghastly Grinner is loose in the real world, and it turns people into these giggling idiots, and they have, like, green slime, and they look all, like, messed up. They kind of look like they're on meth or something, I don't know. They, like, just laugh, and they make terrible jokes. And there was a couple of things about this episode that I thought were super spooky. So there was, like, there was one scene where, anytime the Ghastly Grinner showed up, I mean, he had, like, the big, like, just such a big stance, and he'd be like, what's the matter? Can't take a joke? And he was, he was super spooky. But there was this one other scene in it where they go to take the bus to, like, get to, maybe back to the comic shop to, like, connect with Sylvester Uncas's daughter again. And the bus driver's, like, head turns around and looks at them, and he's, so it was, like, very Linda Blair-esque, but he, he had been, I don't know what you would call the term, ghastly grinned. he was turned into one of those giggling idiots with the green slime. And so it turns out that Ethan has to finish the comic in order to save the day, and he also gets Sylvester Uncas back because he's trapped in the comic world. See, again, Are You Afraid of the Dark, just trapping people in alternate dimensions. So not only does Ethan save the day from the Ghastly Grinner, but he becomes a famous comic book artist, and Hooper Piccolaro still wears her pigtailed braids and her giant glasses, but with, like, a leather jacket in the end, and she becomes cool because of that. So it was awesome. Number 4, it's the most fun in the park when you're laughing in the dark. This episode was the one that my friends and I talked about the most growing up. So it also has probably 2 really goofy names in it, but it is about a kid named Ouija, and his name is spelled like Ouija, not like Luigi or, whatever. And he has a friend named Josh, and Ouija's kind of a bully, and so they're out at a carnival, and they want to go into, like, Ouija wants Josh to go into this dark ride, and it's called Laughing in the Dark, and it's like it's like a clown house, like a spook house, and so he's like, all right, I don't want you to just go in there. There's a clown at the end of this, and I want you to go in and steal his nose. And so, they talk about, like, the history of the place, and that it's, like, supposed to be haunted and spooky and all this. And so he's, like, luring his friend. He's like, what are you, a chicken? And so Josh is like, no, I'm going to go in and I'm going to steal the clown's nose, who's Zeebo. And you know what is incredible about this episode is, well, first of all, you may recognize the teller for, so the guy who like takes your tickets to let you into the funhouse has a very, very familiar face, and he's a character we'll talk about in the next couple of episodes. But he, gets him to come in, and so now he goes through, and most of the stuff is like, like a popping out skeleton, or just mirrors and whatever. But then he sees a clown in there who is scary as heck, and I'm not even scared of clowns, but he's like, what's the matter, and I don't remember exactly like what the clown says to him, but he's so spooky, like looking at him in the mirror. And then you get to the end of it, and it says like, oh, here's the exit. But in order for him to prove to his friend that he is man enough, right, there's 3 doors at the end, and he has to pick one, and Zeebo is inside one of them, and he knows that. And so he finds the exit door, and he thinks about it, and he says, nope. And so now he opens the other door, and here is this clown. Not as scary as the other clown that he sees in the mirror, but it's like a dummy. And so the clown, like, moves up on, like, a conveyor belt, and, and so, like, to scare him. And so he goes up, and he's like, all right, sorry, Zeebo, whatever, and takes his nose. And so now he goes back, and the deal was, if he does it, that the other guy had to wear it on his face in school for, like, a week. And so they're taunting each other, normal, like, young boy, like, taunting each other. And so the kid kind of, Josh, he starts getting, like, a little bit of a big head from doing it. And Ouija calls him one day and is like, hey, like, do you think maybe I could just wear it for a couple days, whatever. And so Josh, of course, is now home alone. And his mom leaves him a note to say, like, that he has food and, all this stuff. And he gets a phone call, and he thinks it's going to be Josh calling again. He thinks it's going to be Ouija calling again. But on the other line, the voice says, like, if you don't give it back, I'm going to come get it. And the story about Zeebo was that you would know he was coming because of, like, the smell of his stinky cigars. And so now this kid is home alone, and he goes to microwave his dinner, and he finds his bowl in the microwave filled with old, like, dirty cigars. And then he drops a bowl of pudding on the floor, and when he looks at the footprint, there's a big Z and, like, a footprint, like a big clown footprint, that Zeebo is there. And so he runs back up and he calls, and so he goes to call his friend, and he's like, tell your sister to hang up, like, I hear the noise in the background. He's like, dude, we only have one line in our house. So it's like, oh, the call's coming from inside the house, kind of thing. And so now the boy's in the room, and you can hear Zeebo, like, outside the room. You can see, like, the shadow of the feet outside the door. So the kid is now scared as heck. He knows that Zeebo's curse is real, and so now he runs. I don't know if he, like, jumps out the window or like he does something. I don't know, but he gets out the window, and now he runs back to the Laughing in the Dark Park, and he gives Zeebo back his nose. And in the end, you see the teller outside smoking the big cigars. So it's like, is that guy really a ghost? So, all right, number 3, the Tale of the Dangerous Soup. So, Dr. Vink with a Dangerous Soup was one of the best episodes of Are You Afraid of the Dark, because not only because it starred a young Nev Campbell, but because Dr. Vink was the best character, in my opinion. He was the best reoccurring character because he was spooky and kooky, and just kind of, you knew when he was on an episode that it was going to be extra spooky, which was awesome. So Dr. Vink has this restaurant. He serves soup. That is $100 a bowl. And so the staff working there, they don't know the secret of what it is, and all these people would come in and buy it, and he would only allow them to buy one apiece. And so you want to know what the secret is of the soup. And so it turns out that he's trapping people in this room with this, like, gargoyle looking, thing, and it would be like, it knows what scares you. And so when you're in this room, anything that you were afraid of, you would see, and it would make, like, a fear elixir, like, this statue had the power to like drain your fear from you. And so he would use that as the secret ingredient in his soup. It's the guy to go in there, and you find out that he had like a terrible uncle who died, and his fear is to see his uncle like rise from the dead. And Nev Campbell's watching, and she sees what's happening, and she's like, no, this can't be. And so she opens the door, and now this gargoyle thing like flies out and is free. And Dr. Vink is like, you don't know what you've done, I have to get it back. But it's really all a ploy, because the thing never leaves. And Dr. Vink is pretty much probably watching in the distance, even though it's like they never show that, but it's like kind of implied. And so everywhere they look, they're seeing things that they're scared of, like snakes, and he sees his uncle again, and she gets trapped back into that room, and it's closing in on her. And he is the brave one and kind of like faces his fear and helps to break the spell. And so they think they break the spell, they think that everything is over, until Dr. Vink looks into the room that they're in, and he says that he plans on being in business a long time. And he's like, it still knows what scares you. And so the gargoyle, you know, thing is back in its place, and Dr. Vink will haunt them forever. Number 2, The Tale of the Quicksilver. This episode really scared me as a kid. It is about a kid named Aaron and his younger brother Doug, and they move into a new house, and they're starting at a new school, and he meets a girl, and you know, you can tell they have a crush on each other, and they keep running into each other. And one of the first things she comments on when she sees him is he has this necklace on, and it's a silver, like you know, it's like an Air Force like kind of necklace. It's wings, and he says it was his grandfather's. So his younger brother Doug starts getting sick, and he now is experiencing like a little bit of weird stuff in the house. They feel like kind of spooked there, but Aaron has a dream where he sees a girl who looks just like the girl Connie that he has a crush on, and he sees her in his room in a nightgown, looking really sick, and casting this spell. And so she would like hold up like it was like a spoon, and like like on a piece of wood, and she had like a door drawn on the wall, and there was all these candles, and she was like, Arabarius Locaradi, creature of darkness, come to me. And so then like she starts saying like then she starts to say, Locaradet, I command you to enter this amulet, but it doesn't come. And so this creature is like coming out of the wall, and he's like this scary looking guy, and it doesn't work. And then all of a sudden you can tell that the room like starts to go on fire. Like she knocks down a candle, and she looks at him in the dream, and she says, I did it wrong. And so he wakes up, and he's all shaken up, going like, what the heck is going on here? And his necklace was on the nightstand, and falls down and like rolls to a part of the wall. And when he goes to get it, he finds, I think like the wall like opens up or something, like there's like a loose panel, and he finds a yearbook that has a girl who looks just like Connie, and it says Laura Turner. And so he sees this yearbook, and he's like not sure like what's going on. And so now the next day he goes to school, and he confronts Connie and says like, who is this? And she's like, are you trying to be funny? Like, that's not funny. And he's like, no, I don't know who it is. Like, I found this in my bedroom. And so she's like, that was my twin sister. And so he gets her to come over, and so he asks her what happened. And so he tells her about the dream, and she says that she was convinced that the house was haunted, and that if she, you know, if she cast this spell, then this, you know, Quicksilver monster, whatever, would leave her alone. And so they decide to redo the seance. And so in the meanwhile, this poor kid Doug is sick, and he's laying in bed, and he's like, you know, he's really, he's like deteriorating, but he's also being haunted at the same time, and you feel really bad for him. And so at first, like, Connie's kind of apprehensive about, you know, trying to do this spell again. She feels like, you know, really sad about her sister, but at the same time, you know, Aaron's forcing her, saying like, hey, like this, I think this is happening to Doug. Like, I think, you know, he's really sick, and now he's seeing ghosts, and like, so if this is going to happen again, please help me stop it. And so they decide to have this again, and so here they go again with the Arabarius Locaradi, creature of darkness, come to me. And out, you know, comes the creature, and he's all like, you know, looking all scary, and they go to command him into the amulet, but they didn't have silver. They had a spoon, which is not made out of silver. And so they end up using his Quicksilver necklace. You know, he comes to his senses and realizes it's not the right one. And so he attaches that to that, and they suck this spirit into the amulet. And then Connie gets to see her sister. She comes out like a ghost, and, you know, she doesn't say anything. And but Connie says to her, like, I love you and I miss you, and, you know, whatever, and they touch hands. Time for number one. Are you ready? My all-time favorite Are You Afraid of the Dark episode is The Tale of the Midnight Madness. This episode was the coolest episode to me. Like, even still, I love it. I love it because it's another Dr. Vink with the episode, but it's also a story where the bad guy wins. Again, very reminiscent of the Danger Soup, which I love. So it's Pete and Katie, and they work at this Rialto movie theater. And Pete really wants to say that they're not selling any tickets. They have like one woman who shows up, and, you know, she asks for a refund, like, you know, and so it's you know, times are grim, and so he's doing everything he can. He's going out and he's giving out flyers and really trying to restore this. You know, or really save this theater, which I have a love for. Maybe that's why I love this movie. Maybe why I love this episode so much is because I love old movie theaters, and so I've been to a bunch, and so it's like I would be Pete. I would be like trying to preserve that history, and so their boss comes down and he tells them, "Hey guys, that's it. It's over. Like, we're not making the money, and so we're gonna be probably closing down." And so they're really bummed out, and all of a sudden they hear someone at the door. And it's none other than Dr. Vink. And so Dr. Vink talks to the manager and says, I want to make a deal. I have a movie that I want you to show. And I guarantee you that if you show this movie, your theater is going to become a success. But when it does, I want one night a week of my choosing, or your choosing, one night a week, let's just say one night a week, to show my other films. And he says, you know, if it goes, I'll give you this and this, and I'll give you a cut. And he says, I don't want your money. I just want to show my other films. And he says, all right, a deal. All right, so the movie is in this old container, and it's like this big, like, you know, I don't know, ancient looking, like, kind of thing, you know, projector holder, movie reel, like, kind of holder, and it's really old and decrepit looking. And they're not, the guy's like, whatever, this guy's nuts. I'm not showing these here. So they just kind of put it to the side. Until one night, they have a couple of people there for a crowd, and, you know, like for a Saturday night movie, and the film melts. But it melts because the case opens, and you see, like, you know, that it's melting the film in the projection room. So Pete quickly acts, and he says, okay, you know, we have this other movie, like, we can put in. And so Katie goes out to the crowd, and she says, okay, you know, it's unfortunate, but the movie is damaged, and we're not going to be able to show you. However, we have another film we're going to show you, and if you don't like it, we'll still give you a refund. You know, like, and so they put in Dr. Vink's movie. And Dr. Vink's movie is like Nosferatu, and it's this great, you know, white, veiny, long-fingered Nosferatu, and in the story, the vampire wins, and it's awesome. And so, and you see the people in the crowd feeling spooked, and, you know, all this, and the movie's over, and nobody asked for a refund, and they're like, whoa, this could really save the theater. So they start showing it, and the movie theater is packed out, and they're saving the day, so they're just ecstatic. Great. Now Dr. Vink comes, and he comes back, and he says, hey, I told you this was going to happen, and so now I want my cut. What I want is to show my other films like we had a deal on. And the guy says, I can't do that. Like, we're getting big movies in here now. Like, I can't show your movies. And he's like, no, like, you have to. Like, this is not going to work. And, you know, he's fighting him on it. And so the boss is, of course, being a jerk, and Dr. Vink is like, I'll be back, you know. And so now you know something's going to happen. So in the meanwhile, now Pete is he's watching the movie, he's trying to think about, like, what makes the movie so magical that it's really drawing people in. And when he falls asleep, he sees, or he thinks he's dreaming, but he sees the vampire come out of the film. This Nosferatu creature is loose in the movie theater, and you see him like coming around corners and like his long like bendy fingers around the doorway, and like that was the, you know, that visual as a kid, like, you know, whenever you would imagine seeing a monster, or if you saw like a monster in a kid's movie, you would see like the hand before the monster, so it was super spooky. Pete gets this bright idea that if the monster can come out, he can go into the movie. He goes into the screen, and now the Nosferatu follows him into the screen, and he shines sunlight on him and watches the Nosferatu go to ash. And so now he comes out of the movie, he's all excited, him and Katie are excited, and you know, the manager wakes up and he's like, oh, what happened to me? And you know, he's got the bite marks on his neck, and Dr. Vink shows up and says, I could not have made a better movie myself, you know, this is great. And so the guy said, listen, you know, I'm really sorry, I came to my senses, like, I'm gonna give you your 1 night a week. And Dr. Vink says, you don't have to do that. He's like, it's not necessary because I just purchased this theater, and so now I'm going to show my movies all the time. And so you have to imagine that he would unleash a potential world of horrors ahead, and that was what was the best about Dr. Vink episodes. Sardou episodes always ended with Sardou being kind of the offbeat hero, and Dr. Vink's episodes always ended with him, you know, still being the master villain when it was over. So that is my countdown of my favorite Are You Afraid of the Dark episodes. If you haven't, watch some this weekend, and feel free to tell me what your favorite episodes are. Let me know which ones you think should have made my list that didn't make the cut. Well, until next week, stay spooky, and I'll see you soon. Bye!